Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar series on leading education in the age of disruption, brought to you by the Development Academy of the Philippines in partnership with the Asian Productivity Organization. I am Yami D from the DAP Center for Governance, and I will be your moderator for this webinar series. Prior to the end of the first quarter of this year, the Philippine education sector was forced to conform to government regulation to shut down physical schools because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Uncertainties arose as to how learning could continue, particularly in areas where resources are limited and where technology is unavailable. The use of technology in meeting education outcomes has been a popular discussion, including in developing countries. With the emergence of the fourth industrial revolution, or what is coined as the digital revolution. Education 4.0, as this is called, is disrupting traditional approaches or concepts of schooling, teaching, and learning to benefit the new generation of learners who are not only technology savvy, but also technology independent. These learners should be trained to see beyond the technology and be molded to become critical thinkers, problem solvers, and innovators. The webinar series on leading education in the age of disruption aims to discuss the essential features of Education 4.0 and showcase current education governance trends, practices, and research findings that may contribute to generation of insights and ideas that could be adopted for policy reform and program implementation for the education sector under the new normal. Before we formally start, allow me first to reiterate some reminders and house rules during this webinar series. All sessions in this webinar series are being recorded and broadcasted live via YouTube for documentation purposes. By joining this webinar, you automatically consent to such recordings. For attendance purposes of our participants, both here at Zoom and at our YouTube channel, kindly type in your name and agency at the chat box. Please put your microphone on mute to minimize background noises and to avoid distraction during the session. Questions during the session will be relayed using the chat box. Kindly type in your complete name and agency in the chat box along with your question, which shall be responded to during the open forum. We may request you to speak if clarification or elaboration is necessary. Lastly, presentation materials can be accessed in the webinar series Google Drive using the link flashed in your screen. Our chat monitors will also post this link in the chat box. If you will experience difficulty in reading the presented material, you can download it now. Some emails, however, may require special permission on our part to access the files. Before we start today's lecture, we would like to recognize the senior executives and key personnel from the central, regional, and division offices of the different participating agencies: Department of Education, National Economic and Development Authority, Department of Budget and Management, Commission and Higher Education, Technical Education and Skills Development Authority, Philippine Science High School System, Development Academy of the Philippines, state universities and colleges, and faculty and students from various schools and universities. Again, thank you for joining this webinar session despite your busy schedule as we adapt to this new normal. Today's session is entitled Redesigning Educational Systems Towards Industry 4.0. While Industry 4.0 is revolutionizing work and our lives, educational systems should evolve accordingly. In this session, we will try to understand the best directions that allow countries should follow to reform their educational systems, so to improve the employment chances of our learners. Our resource speaker is from Naples, Italy. Presently, he is an associate professor at Universita of Campania, Luigi Vanvitelli in Capua, Italy. He previously served as secretary of the Italian Association of Labor Economics and acted as consultant for several organizations such as the European Commission, ILO, UNDP, UNESCO, and World Bank. His main research interests are in labor and education economics, as well as in development and transition economics. To deliver webinar session 1, let us welcome Dr. Francesco Pastore. Sir? Dr. Pastore?
Thank you. Good morning to everybody. I am starting my video. Here I am. Good morning.
Good morning, Dr. Pastore. Good morning from Italy.
And so I would like to start my presentation. I'm very glad. First of all, let me thank you for this invitation to join this project, which is very interesting. It allows me to experience the relationship with the Asian countries that I consider very important because, as we will see also from my presentation, Asian countries are certainly, many of them are on the top of the frontier, and therefore it's always interesting to compare our experiences. So I will try to bring some results of the educational research in the field, and I hope that my presentation will contribute to the debate in Asian countries. As we will see, it is typical of the Asian approach to Industry 4.0 to point very much on educational reforms. So in my presentation, I think I'll try to highlight some important directions to improve the education system, not only in Asian countries, but all over the world. I would like now to start my presentation. I don't know, honestly, how to, I should share my video, I guess, my screen. How to do that, you know? Can you share screen? Here you are. So this is the title of the presentation, Redesigning Educational Systems Towards Industry 4.0. And these are my affiliations. The outline of presentation is, first I will try to show what are the main characteristics of the fourth industrial revolution. And I will then discuss the impact on the labor market and the role of firms and human resources management within firms to deal with these changes, and then the role of government. And we will see that there are different approaches to how the government should intervene, and from a liberalist approach to dirigist approach to a mix of the two. It is important to make some investment in infrastructures, incentives of firms, and also establish new labor market regulations to especially regulate the new labor relations that are generating in the labor market because of Industry 4.0. And then we will focus especially on educational policy as the probably most important tool to face the transition to the new Industry 4.0. So the fourth industrial revolution, how is it characterized. I think that it is important to understand the fourth industrial revolution to make a very, very short historical evolution of the previous industrial revolutions. At the beginning, we had merchant capitalism, which is a kind of capitalism that developed all over Europe and all over the world in the form of a merchant paying skilled self-employed people, artisans, on piece rates. So they were working, artisans were working in their home, and they used to produce some manufacts which were then bought by the merchant and brought to the market, and the market was generating a profit for that, of course. First industrial revolution involved so-called industrial capitalism, so the tendency to introduce mechanical production, and this led many workers, many artisans to leave their self-employed jobs into and to go as proletariat within these firms to work, these industries. And therefore, we had a large change in the social structure from artisans to laborer. And the second industrial revolution, which happened in the 800, introduced mass standardized productions and unskilled labor. So the workers that were still in part at least skilled workers in the first industrial capitalism became unskilled labor with mass production. They became part of the machines, so to say. And third industrial revolution, which happened only recently, more recently, sorry, here there is a mistake. It happened in the late 60s, 70s of the last century, involved automation of manual work, information communication technologies, and increasing demand for skilled labor, fossil fuel energy. And then we had the fourth industrial revolution in the 2000s. Somebody says in 2011. This involved clean and renewable energy, completion of digitalization in consumption and production, extreme diversification of productions, robotization of many jobs, some also requiring creativity and job-specific competencies for the first time, and also the introduction of 3D printers. These are only some of the innovations that have been introduced in the last years, really, in the economy, so to push us to call it an industrial revolution. And we now try to see what is the specific impact of this revolution. And one point is also another aspect of the fourth industrial revolution is energy and climate change. In Europe, Europe 2020, which actually is now already passed, is already there are already new objectives for 2030, but more or less the idea is the same: to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases, reduce energy from renewable, use more energy from renewable sources of energy, increase energy efficiency, so reduce the loss of energy in any kind of process, also in our houses. And therefore, all the European countries are moving in this direction. Of course, I know much better the European situation, but maybe from your questions and your debate, we will compare the European situation with the Asian situation. This is more or less what is happening in Europe. I took 5 countries to represent each one of the European welfare state systems because we know Europe is not all the same, like Asia is not all the same. Every country has got its own specificity. And in Europe, we have some liberal countries, the Anglo-Saxon world, Bismarckian countries, Central Europe, especially Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and so on. Scandinavian countries, Northern Europe, which means Finland, Norway, and Sweden. And also we have the Latin Rim, which is the Southern European countries, which are very different from the rest of Europe. The so-called pigs, sometimes Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain. And then we have some post-communist economies in Eastern Europe, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, and so on. And here you can see what is the situation in these countries. And more or less, I would say, in terms of reduction of emission, we are more or less at the same level. Renewable energy, Sweden is much forward, and also, well, Sweden is always one of the best, one of the countries that is more advanced, and energy efficiency also, you can see the situation more or less what is here in this table. But we know that the effort is much bigger for the next 10 years. Actually, European countries are pushing towards total abandonment of fossil energy by 2050 and so on. So this is another important driving force of the change. Here we have, again, we show the tendency in not only in Europe, but also in other countries. I don't want to go too much into detail because we don't have enough time. And then we can discuss very shortly some examples of famous robots that give us an idea of what is going on in the field of artificial intelligence and how it's progressing very quickly. Actually, these are more prototypes rather than real robots in the industry, because other robots in the industry are probably more spread, but these give you an idea of the potential that artificial intelligence has got in the future to and to the number of jobs and activities, tasks within jobs that are going to be touched by this revolution. Sophia is a robot that is especially designed to serve in healthcare, education, customer service, and in the future, people say it could be also start also a new business, but fortunately, it's not still a legal entity. And another famous robot is Rodiman. Rodiman has got gives you an idea of the spread and diffusion of new technologies and the type of jobs that could be also substituted by machines. In the future, also the work as a cook or pizza could be substituted by a robot. And this robot has a particular characteristics. It is able to learn from movement of humans. So if you connect the robot to a pizza cook, he will learn how to use, how to make pizza. And it can learn also how to make other types of jobs, which are supposed to be, because if you talk with people in Naples, for instance, my hometown, they think that pizza cook is very skilled and creative individual that will never be substituted, because making a pizza is something unique in Naples and so on. But actually, Rodiman is able also to make pizza. So also these kind of jobs, manual jobs, which were supposed to be characterized by some creativity, are being substituted. And then there is another example which gives you a strong impact, and it's Da Vinci. Da Vinci is the robot who has become a surgeon and can do operations that no human can make. And some people nowadays, especially for some particular type of surgery, they want to be they want to be operated by this robot because it is very accurate, very precise, and has reduced dramatically the negative consequences of surgery. And also there are other types of robots that may take care of elderly or also children. So, and this is also another type of job that we used to think that it was unsubstitutable. Although, of course, for instance, these robots cannot make all the type of services that are necessary for children or for elderly, but still they may be used in some of the tasks that are involved into social assistance. And another last point I want to remember, which will probably be a very important revolution, is self-driving cars. There are already some prototypes, and still there is some need for improvement, but the direction is there, and probably soon there will be also spread use of self-driving cars. So what is the diffusion of these robots? Because I was, in this first part, I was concerned with discussing some very shocking news, some very shocking new technologies. But we want to know how spread is this technology, or not exactly this kind of robots, which are very specific and very innovative, but for instance, how spread are robots in the industry, because industry is already in some countries robotization is very advanced, and here we should say the Asian countries are very much on the frontier of this ride. You can see that South Korea and Singapore are among the most, by far, the most countries that use more robots in the industry. We have over 600 robots per 10,000 people employed in the manufacturing sector in the South Korea, and about 460 in Singapore. Germany, which is the most advanced European countries by far, is very much behind, and is lagging behind, and is less than half the case of South Korea. And the same applies also, but also Japan, which used to be probably in this field one of the leaders in the world, now appears to be less spread than South Korea, but still on the fourth level, and so on. So you can see that the average is much lower, 74 robots per 10,000 employees, and many European countries are lagging behind. Also in this, well, the United States is just a little bit above the average, and in Australia, I think, is lagging behind in this field. So, but we can see that if the tendency is, if South Korea is leading the run, probably in the future also other countries will increase the number of robots in the industry, which will reduce the requirement of labor. And in fact, we can see also that this is another statistics that is quite clear. The increase in the share of in the number of robots in the world is dramatic in the last years, especially, and it's a very upward trend. And probably the COVID-19 is pushing forward these statistics, because of course, it has made an important it has been an important pull factor to the diffusion of new technologies, so robots, artificial intelligence, starting from smart working and so on, which everybody is experiencing in the last year, which appear to be almost impossible to spread too much. I mean, in Italy, there was a debate that we were not ready, we were not able to introduce smart working on a mass scale, but actually with COVID-19, like in any other country, we are experiencing almost all smart working. So this has and at the same time it has produced a very important impact from a psychological point of view, because people have started to see these innovations not as something negative but positive, for at least in part, and something that may improve our lives, may increase productivity, and therefore something to continue to develop, although with some caveats, which we will also try to discuss later. Here we have the diffusion of robots by countries, and it gives you again an idea of the fact that Asia is leading this ride, and Europe is lagging behind, and even more so the North American countries and also Australia. So Asia is very much forward. I've been to South Korea a couple of times, to Seoul, and I was impressed by also the culture that people. I hear some voices. I hope I can continue. And here I suggest some push and pull factors that may affect the new technologies, the diffusion of new technologies. And now let me consider the labor market effects of the Industrial Revolution. Every Industrial Revolution has produced some changes in the social structure and the structure of jobs. And the list of jobs that are at risk of automation is increasing more and more. Although, as we will see in the ground, there are different views. Some people say that these jobs are going to disappear. Others say that they are just going to change. So telemarketers, tax preparers, sports referees, and so on, they are all supposed to disappear. Pilots of cars, of aircrafts, long-term caregivers, tutor kids jobs, surgical doctors, and many other. And also there is a discussion about which kind of jobs are more at risk, and jobs that are considered more routinary, repetitive, and predictable, but also some creative jobs, as we have seen with the pizza cook, only jobs that require a great deal of creativity, and also job-specific competencies will not be reproducible. This is a very important point. So the jobs that have a job-specific component of skills are the least easy to disappear, and this is a good guidance to understand what how should educational systems be reformed, as we will see, because we have particular types of education that systems that help individuals to develop their job-specific competencies, and also instead less at risk jobs are jobs that involve genuine creativity, such as being an artist, a scientist, developing a new business strategy. Many people say that self-employment, entrepreneurship will be very, very important, much more than ever before. Also occupations that involve building complex relationship with people, such as nurses and business people, jobs that are highly unpredictable. For example, if you are a plumber, is called out of emergencies in different locations, you will always have some work to do. And what are then the consequences? Well, first of all, a reduction in the labor requirements of all productions. Of course, machines are made to substitute labor, so there will be less request for labor in many productions. There will be a greater instability of labor in the sense that it will be ever increasingly volatile, any economic activity, which means that lifelong jobs are at risk. Firms will close more frequently, and therefore people will have to move from one job to another more frequently than ever before. Will change the nature itself of work. There will be less lifetime jobs. There will be an increase in the share of self-employment, liberal professions, such as barristers, fiscal advisors, and so on, increasing engineers, architects, increasing share of entrepreneurs. More people will be involved in their own enterprise. Although at the beginning there were some dramatic predictions regarding the loss of jobs due to Industry 4.0, by especially Frey and Osborne, a famous, very much cited book, paper by these two economists, German economists. They calculated that 47% of workers in the United States are at risk of losing their jobs, replaced by automation. But actually, this dramatic vision of Industry 4.0 has been, after this study, changed, and nowadays people are much less pessimistic about it. Well, there were also other studies following Frey and Osborne methodology to calculate this loss of jobs, which reached the same or similar conclusions. Asian 5 would lose, according to Chang and Fu, 56% of jobs in the next 20 years in 2016. But then there were other works, other studies that changed completely this prediction in a very different direction. For instance, McKinsey here in this table, which I took from my report for the European Parliament on EU and ILO relationship, which I also provided for as a further reading to you through the APO. So you can find this and download it from the APO website. Well, the McKinsey Global Institute calculated that actually only 5% of occupations can be automated entirely and therefore disappear, whereas the rest is mainly changing in the sense that many tasks within each employment, each job will be automated by it, but the job will still be there. And this is the more recent approach by, I was mentioning here is not mentioned, but there was a famous study by author, American economist, who showed that the study of Frey and Osborne considered jobs to disappear too easily, so to say, but actually what was disappearing were tasks rather than jobs. So under this respect, it means that only a smaller share of jobs will disappear, but the old jobs will completely change their tasks. So they will be done in a very different way from the past. So, and more recently, there have been several other studies following this tasks approach and reaching a completely different conclusion from Frey and Osborne. And as you can see, much less dramatic reduction in the number of jobs. But still, it means that jobs will change, and therefore also probably our education system need to be changed. So that is what we are concerned with in this presentation. How should education systems adapt to these changes? Well, one first indication we have drawn from our previous discussion is that it should develop much better job-specific competencies, and we will come back again on this point. For the social structure, we have that, of course, any production method will involve a different social structure. First industrial revolution implied the proletarization of artisans. Social structure is very changing, although in the long run, and therefore we do not really realize that changes are happening, but they happen. Second industrial revolution involved, as we say, the proletarization and no, the second industrial revolution, the skilling of the workforce due to mass production and the tendency to automation in the industrial production. And the third industrial revolution implied an increasing skill inequality. So it's increasing inequality by skill and also incomes by skill. So some ICT managers and experts were gaining a lot of money, and university degrees have become very important, especially in the United States. The so-called return to high education increased dramatically at the expenses of low-skilled workers. What will be the consequences of Industry 4.0? For the industrial revolution will involve probably a disappearance or at least a reduction not only in blue-collar workers but also in white-collar jobs, at least some of them, and due to automation of production and also digitalization of consumption and distribution of goods, the emergence of low-skill precarious jobs, including piecewise payment methods, which seem to disappear previously. So again, like in the first, in the merchant capitalism, people are paid on a piecemeal rate, and emergence of dramatic income inequality between billionaires on the one side who are owning, for instance, these big worldwide companies such as Amazon and all these online shopping, which have become, thanks to digitalization, a global firm in few years, and low-skilled workers. So a lot of increasing number of low-skilled workers that earn very little money. Emergence of a small middle class of innovators, technicians, and entrepreneurs. So there is still space for but a much smaller middle class than in the past. And this middle class should be especially involved into introducing these new technologies, so that they will be innovators, technicians, or also entrepreneurs, because self-employment and having their own enterprise will be more and more common. And again, we had, like in the past, two opposite views, as we also have seen from the studies and from the academic studies. There is a Luddites fallacy. Some people tend to think that all jobs will disappear. They are very worried. They are very worried. They want to destroy machines like John Ludd used to do in the UK during the second industrial revolution, leading a movement of people who were against innovation. But on the other hand, innovation, we now are used to it, is also a positive thing, and many other people are much more optimistic about it. And here I want to mention the Nickel principle of the relevance of technical change for labor markets. The point of Steve Nickel from the London School of Economics is that technology is not able to affect the unemployment rate over the long run. So in the long run, no matter how many technologies, how many new technologies have been introduced. The unemployment rate has always remained more or less at the same level, maybe 2-3% more, 2-3% less, but still overall the unemployment rate has never increased indefinitely like the most dramatic predictions would suggest. And the reason is that whenever we have a destruction of jobs, we in the long run have an ever increasing, a much bigger increase in the number of new jobs. So overall, the impact of technology is the algebraic sum of two impact. One is positive and one is negative. Negative one is when all jobs disappear, but there is a new impact, which is the appearance of new jobs, new activities, new products. And generally speaking, until now, the new jobs, the creation of new jobs has been bigger than the destruction of old jobs. So this makes me think that the nickel principle of irrelevance of technical changes for unemployment and labor markets still there and will still work. Although, of course, we might have some negative effects in the short run. And here I don't want to discuss this because we have not enough time, but I took from a keynote lecture by a famous Italian economist, Marco Viverelli, who is a world leader, a world expert in this field, and he makes a historical reconstruction of the debate in the economic literature, starting from Ricardo, Marx, and so on, and to show that what is old and what is new in this revolution, and especially on the effect on the labor market. But I will leave it in the presentation. I left it in the presentation for your perusal. Sorry, I go quicker on this part because we have not enough time. What is then now when we want to think about how to address these changes, and one first subject of these changes, especially important in the liberalist view about Industry 4.0, is the role of firms. Firms are the key engine of change according to liberalist economists, and therefore we should think of what should be the role of human resources management departments of big firms, which are often the leaders of these changes, so this industrial revolution. What firms, I divided the discussion in two parts. What firms will continue to do, first of all. So first thing is that, of course, firms will tend to reduce cost, labor costs especially, and therefore we should expect that they will continue to compete in the global market by introducing new technologies and therefore substituting labor. We should not expect firms to behave differently from these. And therefore they will go through an increasing volatility of any business activity. Any economic activity is bound to be unstable, volatile, more than ever before. And they will substitute labor with machines wherever possible, so we should not expect them to be Luddite, and reduce the share. They will reduce the share of permanent employment in favor of temporary employment for more standard tasks, external labor resources for more professional workers. So we expect that there will be an outsourcing of activities by firms. Firms will tend to use more professional workers because, of course, as I was mentioning before, it is needed to have more and more technical skills, and therefore you need very specialized professionals or people involved in liberal profession to provide such services. They will develop more entrepreneurial activities. probably they will diversify more than ever before their productions to exploit the opportunities offered by the new technologies. New technologies will allow companies, firms to generate new businesses, new productions, and therefore they will have new and different production types. Paradoxically, it will depend on this strategy whether there will be enough increase in productivity to start new businesses and create new jobs. So the job creation phase is very much also to be led by firms. So I think that in the future, the role of these big firms, big companies to generate new jobs, new activities will be very important, because they have an important characteristics, which is entrepreneurship, and therefore they may they may use their entrepreneurship to innovate productions, introduce new goods, new commodities, and therefore generate new jobs. So firms will certainly have a very important role in generating new jobs. But firms, in fact, should recognize their role as leaders of this change and play even more this role. Well, one important aspect is that firms should understand that to get the manpower they need, manpower which is well endowed with creativity and also job-specific competencies. Again, these job-specific competencies come into the discussion, should partly change their mission. In which sense? In the sense that they should be not only a production place, but also a training place for workers. So they should accept as a social responsibility that they should be providing also training to their workers. So they, in this sense, they should be ready to interact with the education system, because as we will see, one important direction reforming the education system will be to introduce more and more frequent occasions for implementing the duality principle, which means allowing part of training not only in classrooms but also in firms, and therefore firms should accept, should consider as an important aspect of their activity to also provide training to young people, to university students, to high school students. So they should collaborate closely with the educational and training systems to allow more VET, more apprenticeship, more industrial PhD, as we will see in a while, and become part of the education and training system based on dual principle. By dual principle, I mean the tendency of the education system to develop not only theoretical skills, but also or general skills, but also job-specific skills. You see, again, these job-specific competencies become part of the discussion. The new model of firms will resemble the guilds model of merchant capitalism. So if we have that people start to be paid also again like artisans on a piece rate, here we also should consider that they should should provide some training to workers. Production, labor, and training will be in one place and should be in one place. School, university rooms will not be anymore the only place where to build knowledge. Knowledge needs to be built in different places. General skills, general education can be built in the classroom, but job-specific competencies cannot. They need to be built within firms. And this is a very important point that firms should understand. But what is the role of government? I mentioned before that there may be three approaches. One first approach is the liberal approach, which was developed in Anglo-Saxon countries, and also EU countries actually have become very much in love with this liberalist approach, or some people say neoliberalist approach, which involves that actually institutions will not need to do anything specific. They will develop automatically thanks to the development of the industrial sector. So attention should focus on private firms. They are the leaders of R&D. The state is marginal according to them in the innovation, at least innovation for production. They think, the liberalist economists think, and the government is just the role to create the best conditions for firms to operate in the best possible way. Innovation, but the center of innovation is only and solely firms. But the big shortcoming of this approach that we are now realizing, especially after the big crisis of 2007, and also in these last weeks of the COVID crisis emergency, is that this approach is very much short-sighted, Europe needs investment, needs public investment, and also in the United States, but especially Europe, because we have many small countries and the investment by each country is never enough. And this liberalist approach that has tended to reduce dramatically investment by the state in infrastructure has made the situation dramatic for many European countries. We do not have enough infrastructure. We still do not have fiber for internet connections. Internet connections is therefore in Italy very weak in many parts of the countries. I guess it's the problem also in the Philippines from the presentation by Yami yesterday, especially in peripheral areas, in smaller islands. I guess there is a problem of connection, which is constraining all the system, because does not allow smart working in the proper way, does not allow teaching, distance learning, and so on. So we need to have very good investment in the sector of infrastructure, as it is now clear. And Europe in the last, and in the next presentation I will discuss the case of Italy, but also Europe, because we are going this direction. The European Union has decided to introduce a special fund to allow large investments in all European countries in the infrastructures. So they understood that eventually Germany, especially, which was very much in favor of the liberal approach, is now understanding that European countries need a more dirigist approach, like in China, India, and South Korea, or also other Asian countries. Whereas the government should provide massive investment in education, R&D, and infrastructure. Of course, if the shortcoming of the liberal approach is short-sighted, because firms cannot think of common goods, cannot think of public goods, which are important in some cases. The example of fiber is a good example. Everybody is doing their best, but if the network of fiber is missing, all efforts are useless. Whereas in the dirigistic approach, one problem is that sometimes you make the wrong investment in the long run, and returns to this investment is lower than expected. But on the other hand, being able to foresee the future and prepare a country for the future is still always very, very beneficial. So we should have a better role of the government, and to probably have a more balanced approach to this. And one key aspect is in the field, in the action of the government, is also education system, as we will see, because this is a kind of investment that is always has always got good and high returns. So what should the government do? Government should first of all provide public material and immaterial infrastructure. I was already mentioning this before. Otherwise, also the spread of new technologies is much weaker, and therefore the job creation phase is coming very late, and job destruction will be bigger than job creation. So therefore, it is very important that there are no bottlenecks, no constraints to the diffusion of new technologies which come from lack of infrastructure, material and immaterial infrastructure. Financial incentives should be provided by the state to training of staff in the field of production and transfer of new technologies, production of new technologies through applied research, transfer of new technologies. And also an important point is, which is typical of the Asian approach, is an in-depth reform of every aspect of the education system. And also another important aspect we are discovering in the last months is new labor regulation, especially for type of jobs that have been generated during the Industrial Revolution. I mean, especially so-called platform work, which needs to be still regulated in the right way all over the world. So what should be the direct intervention of the state? The state should become again more dirigist than it has been in the last 20, 30 years. I mentioned an Italian economist who is working in the UK at Sussex University, where by the way, I also did my PhD in economics at SPRU Science Research Unit of Sussex University. Mazzucato is doing her research, and she has written a very inspiring book about entrepreneurial state, the entrepreneurial state, the role that the state should have, very active role investing in innovation. According to Mazzucato, the state should be a leader of the innovation and the Industrial Revolution, not something that is a constraint to the Industrial Revolution. It should lead the Industrial Revolution, and it is very important to introduce investment, public investment, wired networks, continuous information and debate about the importance of new technologies, progress advertising. And also there are different forms of business incubators that are considered in the literature. I only mentioned two because there are different examples in different countries. We can discuss about it. I will try to show that I will discuss these two examples, digital innovation hubs and competence centers, to show that actually in both of them there is a close interaction between the education system and the business environment. So this is a very important point, the interaction between firms and the education system. Actually, currently, they tend to be on two parallel and lines that never meet. But actually, this is a big problem of the traditional education system, this lack of interaction between the education system and companies. And then what are these new subjects? How can the state intervene in the economy? First of all, following the more like liberalist approach, or also dirigist approach, but who recognizes the role of firms, it is important that there are some incentives for firms who are investing in new technologies. There are different business and different fiscal tools, such as super amortization, hyper amortization, tax credit. These instruments should be used especially to incentivize firms who are introducing new technologies. So if we want to, since also firms, of course, are important in generating change, one tool which is fiscal incentives for firms who are introducing specific types of innovations. For instance, if they use robots, they might receive a very strong amortization, which should reduce taxation for a short period of time when they are undergoing this investment. And this is a very important, proves to be a very important tool to incentivize this kind of innovation by firms. Again, the aim is not to make the innovation slower, but make the innovation faster, because the faster innovation, the sooner job creation will come. And also the state should favor the most innovative firms in many different ways, introduce automatic incentives with co-financing to limit gaining. Of course, any kind of fiscal support, any kind of public policy is subject to gaining, to gaining. So it means tendency to gain the incentive without making the required condition, required investment. And of course, there should be one tool is co-financing, because co-financing is strongly reducing, because it increases the cost for the firms to use the public money. What are the risks? Risks are creating dependence from public spending, tendency of firms to, rather than innovating, trying to gain public money, favoring investment which were already planned. This is another big problem, that probably such incentives will tend to not to generate new investments, but only to support investment which were already planned, affecting only a limited share of firms, a small share of firms, and not all of them, because of course not every firm will use this kind of incentives. For instance, small and medium enterprises tend to say that these incentives are favoring especially big enterprises because they have no enough room to innovate and therefore to gain these kind of incentives. So they are more in favor of, small and medium enterprises are more in favor of public investment in infrastructure rather than fiscal or financial incentives to firms. And therefore, and then we have also competence centers. This should be set up by the government. They should involve universities and polytechnical schools together with firms. To which aim? To the aim of training workers to employ in digital innovation hubs, to work as business incubators to create new businesses, because we know that new technologies are still not fully implemented, not fully developed. We don't use all the potential of our technologies in terms of new productions, new goods, new innovation in the production sector. And this is because we have not enough investment in the creation of new businesses. And also create labs for digital innovations, which can be used by firms in their production. Or the alternative is another form of this kind of interaction between firms and universities, schools, is a digital innovation hub. This is organized more by firms rather than by the state, and firms unions together with the government again, and should provide training on new technologies, specific solutions to firms, for firms operating in given sectors. This is another important point, that firms need to be also helped in introducing new innovations, because probably they not have enough time to make research, they not have enough resources, financial or also human resources to make all the innovations that are possible. And therefore, if there is a digital innovation hub, it will generate innovations that solutions that will be used by all firms in a given sector. So that's why firms unions should be interested in generating this DIH and development of structures for the diffusion and transfer of technical change and innovation among firms. So there is a need to create new businesses to facilitate, so to say, the creation of businesses, help firms, individuals, also individuals to generate new businesses. And this kind of institutions might be more developed, more common, more spread all over the country to generate this kind of innovation and favor their introduction within all branches of industrial production. And finally, we discuss more specifically the educational reform. I was discussing first these previous points to show that actually the educational reform should not be considered in isolation, not be considered only a reform of the education system, but together with other investments in the public sector and together with firms, with the production world, because one of the main direction of the reform is introducing the duality principle. So what are the main direction for the education reform or educational policy? First of all, increasing spending in education and training systems. This is not everywhere sufficient. Europe, for instance, is still very much lagging behind, especially, well, at least some countries of Europe. I guess it is the same also in Asian countries. I don't know, in the Philippines, probably not, but in other Asian countries, certainly spending more in education is important, but Asian countries have made education the key to success. Moving from sequential to dual education system, I already explained the dual education system. It involves, I mean, to understand this difference, we should understand that human capital is made of three components: general education, general experience, work experience, and general and job-specific work experience. While general education is built within classrooms, instead, work experience and relative competencies, general labor competencies or job-specific competencies are generated within firms. So it means that any educational system should provide not only education, but human capital, the entire human capital. So also work-related competencies. And generally, there are two types of systems. Sequential system implies that you first go to school and universities, and then you go to the firm sector, and therefore there is a sequence. So first general education, then work-related competencies are developed after finishing education. The dual education system instead aims to produce both components of human capital at the same time, already when people are at school. Why? Because this makes the transition from school to work much quicker, much better, because you at the same time you learn general education and at the same time also work-related competencies. typical example of dual system is the German education system. Typical examples of sequential system is more widespread everywhere, more common. Another point is eliminating rigidities from the education system. The education system should not generate rigidities that prevent young people from moving from one part to the other of the education system. So in some countries, the tracks are very rigid. For instance, again, this is also the case of Germany. Once you have started, for instance, apprenticeship, then you cannot go to university and so on. This may be a problem, although there are some bridges to allow young people that are in the apprenticeship system to move thereafter to academic universities. But still, we need to be as flexible as possible not to reduce chances for young people, diversifying the supply of skills as much as possible, and to follow more closely the evolution of skills. Any new education system should be able to be flexible enough to generate new skills. For instance, many people complain that we have not enough education for green sector, for the green sector in Europe. I guess it's the same all over the world, because it is a new approach, new technology, and the education system does not have this kind of education, and therefore they should develop some form of flexibility to adapt to the new skills that are required on the labor market, favoring an increasing degree of integration between education and business based on the dual principle. We should give up the distinction between theoretical education, academic education, and technical education. Academic education should also have a work-related competence part, and also the technical education should have also, in addition to technical knowledge, also some theoretical knowledge. So we should have a better integrated system, and we should overcome the idea that academic education is superior to technical education, and young people need both. If they go to the university, still they need to learn some job-specific skills. So we should not consider this as a diminution of general academic competencies. This is more a problem for university professors, honestly, than other people. But education ministries and departments should try to convince also university professors of the importance of this kind of education and the mix of the two components of the human capital. Because professors, for instance, think that human capital is only education. I suggest that we call the Ministry of Education Ministry of Human Capital, not Ministry of Education, because the aim is to produce human capital, not education. Human capital means also work-related competencies. We should never forget this component, or to leave it to the market, like a liberalist approach would suggest. And also it is important to develop well-functioning and comprehensive systems of lifelong learning, because people should, since lifelong jobs are disappearing, it is important to have lifelong learning to help people to develop skills for new jobs that they are going to experience in their lives. This is regarding spending in education as a share of GDP in the OECD countries. We can see that there is large variation, and probably for many countries the spending is very low, it's not sufficient. You can see the countries yourself, but here I have not enough time to discuss all of them, but I want to show the variability, the volatility of this share of spending over GDP, but should be much higher in some countries than it actually is. And again, this is the share of public or spending in education as a share of total public spending. For instance, Italy is one of the countries where spending in education is not sufficient. You can see from this red color is the third last country in this classification. How can we diversify the supply of skills? Well, the one important point I said is to generate new skills and to introduce the duality principle, which now I suppose should be clear. Again, it means generating at the same time during the education period both general education and work-related competencies in all branches of education, while promoting at the same time diversification of supply of skills. Another important aspect of the duality principle is that duality principle makes the education system more flexible to new jobs. I will make you an example. If you allow, for instance, university graduates to have experiences in firms, then probably they will choose also some new firms which are developed in sectors, in new sectors. For instance, a green job. Universities maybe are not ready to develop education in this field. But if young people go into training within the firm into a green firm, then they will learn the new jobs more quickly and also transfer some of this knowledge to the universities. So the universities themselves will have some incentive to generate competencies, also general competencies, general education in these new fields. So interaction between firms and education institutions is very important. Also from this point of view, it will increase also the ability of the education system to supply new skills that were not provided previously in the system, in the education system. And how can we implement the duality principle? Here I give some examples. There are many examples that can be done. I will discuss each of them in the next slides. Well, first of all, work-related learning. Work-related learning is, well, I will discuss this later more in detail. Work-related learning means shortly to provide some, for instance, some weeks of experience within firms for young people at high school level, secondary high school. Also, we need to have very well developed VET systems, which actually are almost in every country, but are not very well developed. In many countries, the component of on-the-job training is missing, and this is a big problem because, like in Italy, its VET systems become like just another type of lyceum because there is no really experience within firms, and this is absolutely to avoid. Another important point is to have at least the possibility for some students at high school level to have a school apprenticeship, because school apprenticeship is for many young people that tend to abandon university, to drop out of school, sorry, not universities, but school. Apprenticeship may be the last resort, the last way to keep them into the education system. So it is very important to provide school apprenticeship, which is able to generate jobs, work for these young people that are not ready, not interested in doing general education. And also for those who choose this kind of track, the VET track or apprenticeship track, like in Germany, there should be professional universities. Professional universities are different, are sometimes called applied universities. So they do not provide academic learning, but more specific learning. And these are typically done by people who have chosen the VT system or apprenticeship at high school. And it's taught to give a high-level education to these people. High-level apprenticeship for university students. This is another interesting aspect. Also, university students should develop work-related competencies. And also other important type of education is MBA. This is not something new, but is something that is not very much spread. It should be more common. We know these programs, but they are very important because they allow people to move from education, high education in one field to more education that is more useful to the business environment. And also business incubators should be more common, training for entrepreneurship and self-employment should be more common into schools, universities, and also after universities. And finally, industrial PhD programs. As we said before, firms need to innovate, but often do not have enough resources. As we'll see, industrial PhD programs will be very useful under this respect. And before going into details about this duality principle and these new directions, I want to just mention shortly the new labor regulation that is also very important. We have a risk of increasing inequality, especially for platform workers. You know, platform workers are all those workers whose job, whose activities depend on a platform. So, for instance, delivery workers, so-called riders, in some countries they are called riders. They deliver food, deliver goods, commodities to the houses of people who have bought online production, online goods or commodities. And these type of jobs are becoming an increasing part of employment and a very important part for many young people. So young people are experiencing precariousness of labor market experiences and need to be helped to transform this kind of jobs in the right direction. I don't want to go much into details about this. I leave it for your perusal. We also discuss these aspects of regulation into the report for the European Parliament, which I provided to the APO, and that is downloadable from the website. I will just mention that the direction that Europe is going in here is to recognize that this kind of jobs should be treated as wage employment. This is a very important aspect. There has been a recent sentence by the High Court of Italy and also other European countries arguing against the idea of many firms to pay delivery workers on an hour base or on a piece rate base. Now the direction will be probably to recognize that these are wage employment jobs and should be recognized all rights and prerogatives of wage employees. Okay, this I don't know what is the experience of Asian countries, but I guess that probably also in Asian countries is going to happen the same. So I don't want to go too much into details because we don't have enough time, and I want to leave also some time to discussion. So let me now go more in details. Work-related learning. We have advantages and disadvantages. On the one hand, well, what is work-related learning? The possibility to do some work experience, and develop some work-related competencies sooner than earlier. Already at the high school, you have from 200 to 400 hours. It comes from Scandinavian countries, but has become widespread all over Europe. It's on-the-job training for high school students. It is compulsory for all students, and students who graduate also from gymnasium and therefore people that tend to follow the academic track to the university may drop out without a university degree. So they also need some of these work-related learning, because they, in case they go to work after gymnasium, so they don't go to the university. In case they don't go to the university, they still need to have some work-related competencies. And of course, we cannot compare with apprenticeship, because apprenticeships implies a much longer period within firms. Apprenticeship is more like vocational education and training, although it's still different. VT systems, unfortunately, are not much developed outside of few Central and North European countries, although there is always a discussion, for instance, by the ILO, the UNESCO to spread this VT system. They think of it, especially for young people that do not want to go into gymnasium. We should not consider VT system inferior to gymnasium. It is just different, and it is not less important. It implies a pair role of gymnasium and VT. Professional and technical knowledge are very important for young people. Of course, we should be careful that they also have some work-related learning. So in the sense that the component of on-the-job learning is very important and should be kept, because in many countries, unfortunately, VT systems are not very well developed. There is not enough integration with firms. And actually, VT systems are very important for many young people to escape precariousness of work experience, of jobs, or poverty, informality, and unemployment, because it gives to young people who not want to follow the academic track qualification and skills that are very important for them in the labor market. So we should really be very careful to maintain, develop vocational education and training systems, and even more so apprenticeship, because apprenticeship, which in Germany regards 60% of any age cohort, implies technical education and on-the-job training with an almost equal weight. Of course, probably apprenticeship is less theoretical, because there is probably also not enough general education. So young people that follow this track generally have very weak general education, but still they have a qualification. They may find easily a job after finishing apprenticeship. They develop very good job-specific skills, although honestly, having very poor general skills, may have problems if their job is disappearing. This is the main problem with apprenticeship, that in the long run, if they lose their job in the long run, they are more, for them it is harder to find a new job, because it is harder to learn new skills. And therefore, if they lose their job, they have a high risk of being trapped into their skills. It is therefore very difficult to find a re-employment for people with apprenticeship who have lost their job when they are middle-aged. So this is a big problem in the apprenticeship system, but still we know that Germany has got, thanks to apprenticeship, the lowest unemployment rate among young people in the world. So Germany is the only country, thanks to this apprenticeship system, whereas the unemployment rate of young people is equal to the unemployment rate of adult people. Another important aspect of the German system is so-called applied or professional universities. In the German dual system, those people who attend apprenticeship when they are at high school age, then they cannot access academic university, but the German system provides to them very high technical and specific content into professional universities. So these universities are generally for public servants or public employment services, public servant in general services, and so on. So they have universities that are not of general academic type, but provide the specific type of skills. But this is also important in the economy to have some technicians with a higher level of skill than the secondary high school. And it contributes to generate a lifelong learning system. Again, this is not academic or general, but applied or professional. MBAs are also very important, and other programs like MBAs. MBAs are business education programs at the master level for individuals who have already done some work experience after finishing their education. And these are very important to move, for instance, people that they could not get business education, but rather different types of education, but they want to enter the world of business. A very good example is Sergio Marchionne. He actually died a few years ago, and he was the AD of the CEO of Fiat, Italian car maker, and he got a degree in philosophy, and then he gained 2 MBAs in the United States and has become a top manager at the world level thanks to these MBAs. So this is a good example. Master programs should be much more common. I can talk with my students or former students, university students, and when they finish university, they understand education much more, because and this is very important aspect of education, of sequential system. During university education, they were not aware of the importance of studying at the university level. They gain this awareness after finishing education, after entering the labor market. At that point, they understand the importance of the knowledge that we were giving to them. And this means that they very often they ask, I would like to do a master program. I would like to develop this kind of knowledge. I would like to, do you have at university a program to study fiscal advisor, or to become a barrister, or to become a housing engineer, or whatever. So they learn the importance of knowledge when they enter in the labor market, because at that point probably they already have an idea of what to do. So we should develop further education to a much greater extent than we actually do now. We need to provide more education at the postgraduate level, which involves also, again, interaction with firms. Although they already work, so they might provide themselves work-related competencies, they will have already some work-related competencies, and they want to develop such competencies also from a general theoretical point of view. So these kind of programs after finishing education are very important. And we already talked about training for entrepreneurship and self-employment and business incubators. This should be much more common. Very often people have entrepreneurial ideas, but they don't know how to make a business plan. So they should be able to have this kind of education, this kind of programs. In Italy, some programs of the kind are very common. They develop very, very strongly, and you understand that there is a a larger need for this kind of education. So we should develop more training for entrepreneurship and self-employment. And finally, industrial PhD. To understand industrial PhD, this means that these are PhD programs which involve also developing an innovation, research for the company. So to do like applied research, not academic research. And this is very important for several reasons. First one is that, for instance, in Italy, we have every year 14,000 PhD graduates, but only 2,000 of them find a job in the academic world. So this means that 12,000 PhDs may go into business, and therefore, why not to develop in them the skills that are useful to firms? So they should develop the skills of applied research, research in the applied field. So making innovation within firms. This is a very interesting program that the European Union is supporting very strongly. In Italy, for instance, many PhD now places must be for industrial PhD. So only a few of them, PhD places are for academic purposes. Many others are for industrial PhD and involve at the same time general education with a supervisor, university supervisor, but at the same time experience within firms and addressing a problem that a firm has got in their activities to help them to innovate production, goods, commodities, whatever. And this industrial PhD may be very interesting tools to innovate within firms and public administration, also public administration. Some industrial PhD may be done also within public sector. And with this point, I have completed my overall presentation, and I hope there is some space for discussion. I tried to be, maybe on some points I was a bit quick, but I am glad that there are 20 minutes to have some discussion together.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Pastore, for a very informative presentation. So may I just, perhaps while you get some water, sir, I'll just highlight some of the topics or the concepts that you mentioned. First is Dr. Pastore had defined digitalization, and this would be Industry 4.0 is digitalization in the consumption in the consumption and production, extreme diversification of production, robotization of jobs. He also mentioned about automation, the possible impact of Industry 4.0 and the labor requirements in the labor market. He also mentioned some possible approaches that the government and education institutions may employ to reduce the impact of Industry 4.0. So perhaps, Dr. Pastore, maybe there were a number of questions that were posted from both the YouTube and the Zoom chat boxes. So I guess the first question that I would have to relay to you is a very common question among our audience today. And this would be on the impact of Industry 4.0 to educators. So there are actually two sides of this particular concern. The first angle of it is the possibility of educators to be replaced by robots. And the other side is the possibility of teachers to be replaced because of their lack of skill or being novice when it comes to Industry 4.0. So what would be your opinion on this, sir?
Well, honestly, I'm more in favor of the optimistic view, in the sense that I don't think that jobs will disappear. Only a few of them will disappear. We have some experience already with the third industrial revolution. Many jobs were really disappearing. Probably this revolution will not imply a complete disappearance of jobs, or at least most jobs, but they will just change. Tasks will change, and of course this will require also that educators should be ready to start the new technologies, to use new technologies. For instance, I should practice more with Zoom, and being able to upload my presentation more easily, but I'm used to Teams, and this kind of experience helped me also to solve this problem now. So I think that there are some studies by experts of young people labor markets, and show that also in this field, people who are experiencing one type of job, who have job-specific competencies, they tend to be more easily ready to learn new kind of skills and new kind of technologies. So this is a good example of the fact that, okay, teachers will be probably challenged by robots, but first of all, robots cannot substitute this. I would say that teaching is quite a creative and specific type of job that hopefully not like pizza cook. It's more difficult to copy and to learn from machines. So I'm quite optimistic that of course, I agree that it is important to teach, to train teachers to learn new technologies and to use them.
Thank you for that.
Unfortunately, I should say that, sorry, just I want to add the one sentence that, again, educational systems should probably provide more teacher training under this respect, because for instance, in Italy, university professors, but also high school professors, teachers do not have any kind of training. They just are allowed to go to class, and there is no training for them, and therefore probably this is something missing in many countries.
Okay, thank you for that, Dr. Pastore. Another question is on the particular digital divide among our learners. So for example, in the case of the Philippines, we are in an archipelago. So we have learners from remote areas who actually do not have particular access to technologies. We also have a challenge when it comes to our infrastructure, the internet, so, and also the skills of our educators when it comes to technology. So what would be your suggestion on how to address this particular digital divide among our learners if we are going to go into Industry 4.0, or you're going to train our learners to be ready to Industry 4.0?
Well, honestly, I think that first of all, the state should provide sufficient infrastructure. For instance, I was mentioning in Europe, now this is a discussion. During the summer, while I was on a holiday, they introduced fiber in my neighborhood. So there is the need for the state to invest more into this. Probably also firms that are providing these internet services should be incentivized to make this innovation, this infrastructure. But at the same time, immaterial infrastructure and also some knowledge by people is important. Unfortunately, people are not prepared. Again, also this innovation of smart working, which has become very common all over the world during the COVID emergency, has been done eventually almost, I mean, people were forced to do it, but had no training at all. And this will be very important, for instance, to have more training courses. For instance, honestly, I become quite experienced with the internet, because when I was doing my PhD in the UK, it was quite common to have some training courses in the university also for this kind of skills. So probably in Italy, instead, many school students and university students not have the need to learn this kind of things. For instance, in some faculties, there are no courses to how to use Excel, how to use any kind of software. I make a course of econometrics in my university, whereas I I use Stata, and students are very keen on my course, because they can learn how to do econometrics, not only what is the theory of econometrics. And I think that this is very important. So probably we'll not do enough teaching in this field, in the universities, in schools, also for professors, for teachers, or for public servants that need to use to do smart working. Maybe the state should provide more training about this. Again, I think this is one of the points that I was mentioning in my presentation. It is important to have lifelong learning systems. In many countries, they are not well developed. So providing, incentivizing universities, schools to generate this kind of courses also after finishing education, because also somebody who has finished education or is already in the world of work, how can they learn new technologies? So I think that probably the state cannot do himself this kind of training, but they can support schools and universities to organize courses in this field.
Yeah, the other question that we have in relation to the support of the state to the education reforms regards curriculum. There was a question from our universities and also from one of our senior high school faculty that if, for example, we were able to make some changes in our curriculum to make it to make our learners ready for Industry 4.0, how can we be sure that our business establishments are ready to accept these young workers and conform to Industry 4.0 standards?
You mean the firms?
Yes.
How do we know that firms are ready to accept them?
Yes.
Or to train them?
To make the skills that they will be getting from the schools to be used, since there would be no mismatch or there would be no over-skilling or under-skilling for that matter.
Well, actually, the dual system is one system that is supposed to be less to generate less over education, because if you in fact you develop your skills not only into the education system, but also on the job, then this will allow you to develop exactly the type of job specific skills that are required within firms. So generally speaking, firms should be interested in providing this kind of training, although they do not understand that. I just mentioned that training by firms should be considered like a social responsibility, but in Germany they say that firms are interested in providing this kind of training, because actually it is very useful to them to avoid that they get people that do not have the specific competencies to do that kind of job. So to have either over education or under education. So duality principle should reduce over education by developing exactly those skills that are required to do the job. So this is at least from a theoretical point of view. Of course, one problem is that firms do not recognize their interest in this, and therefore they are not always ready to provide this kind of training. For instance, in Italy, there is not such a culture, but also sometimes it requires, and that's why it is a social responsibility, because sometimes it also requires an investment. I was visiting Ducati company in Italy, you know, the firm, the factory for bikes, motorbikes in Italy. And because they adopted one system of one dual system, it's called Italian duality system. I talked with the CEO of Ducati. They made actually an investment of €500,000 to provide a training center for high school students doing some technical training within the company. So he was mentioning that not many firms are ready to make such an investment for training. But on the other hand, Ducati has become part of the Audi group, German group, so they introduced the culture of duality principle. And they understand that, okay, maybe this is an investment, but it got also some return, because thanks to this kind of training that they do within the firm, they have always workers ready to enter the firm, the company, with the right skills that they need. And that nobody else can generate, because there is no other way to learn how to make a motorbike like Ducati. But the only way is to do it within the firm.
All right. So considering this pandemic situation, Dr. Pastore, can we say that the Industrial Revolution is an answer, or would be an additional problem for us given the present condition of the educational system that we have right now?
Well, COVID is certainly a big risk and for our economies. But of course, we have experienced a dramatic reduction of GDP, and therefore this is something negative in Europe. I don't know in Asian countries, but I guess it's the same. Probably Philippines, in your presentation yesterday, the day before yesterday, you mentioned that you try to avoid lockdown, full lockdown, so probably you reduce the risk of the loss of GDP. But on the other hand, we have to say that I consider this also a good opportunity in a sense, because it has helped a lot to develop these new technologies, to spread these new technologies, to spread smart working. And honestly, in many sectors, smart working was already required and discussed by many years. For instance, my wife is a barrister, and we were discussing in Italy in the last 10 years that some legal procedures should be made digitalized, but they never did that, because many lawyers, as I was mentioning before, had no training at all in the field. So they were complaining, I don't know how to use even email. So many barristers in Italy, they have a humanistic approach to knowledge. So this is again one point that I mentioned before. We should totally abandon the idea that theoretical aspects are important and practical aspects are not. This comes from the Greek times. In Greek times, working was typical of inferior people, whereas theoretical thinking was typical of superior men. So we still have in our culture, I think all over the world, the idea that theoretical knowledge is for superior people and technical knowledge is for inferior people. So barristers in Italy think I am a superior man, so I cannot use new technologies, right? So this is a how to say, a taboo of the old culture that goes back to the before Christ period. Sorry. This is another aspect. We should abandon this difference between theoretical and practical knowledge. And under this respect, the pandemics has been pushing very strongly towards the smart working. Also, barristers nowadays, after a few weeks, they learn how to use digitalization. So it means, okay, we should have more training, we should have more support probably for people that not have enough knowledge. But at the same time, this is also a decentralized process. So people themselves will understand that they need to learn this. So what we can do is to provide some incentives for schools, universities that provide this kind of training, in my view.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Pastore. So while we have so many wonderful questions from our participants, since we are on lack of time, so maybe just one last question, sir, to close our open forum. Would you say, sir, that we are we ready for Industry 4.0 in the education sector?
Well, before answering, I want to say if somebody wants to write an email, I'm ready to answer. So please get in touch if you wish. As to your question, well, probably I think we are not ready. I think my impression is that much needs to be done to reform our education systems. I really think that duality principle should be much more spread, and that we should have more of this on-the-job training. We should have more, for instance, industrial PhDs are very important. They will help people, firms, companies, and also the public sector to develop innovation, to introduce new types of production and new products. So I think that entrepreneurial jobs and training is important, and also business incubators are not enough. I can see whenever there is an investment in this field, there are many applications, thousands and thousands of applications, and many of them are very useful, and they introduce something new, some new products, some new activities. So I think that there is room for the education system to lead these changes, and I believe that much can be done in this direction. And I hope that my presentation is a contribution to think at least to some of the interventions that might be useful.
Yes, indeed, sir, it is. Thank you very much, Dr. Pastore. So that concludes our open forum for the first webinar session for this series. So we would like to again express our gratitude to our resource person for his presentation this afternoon. And I would like to remind our participants that at the end of this session, we would like to remind everybody to accomplish the feedback form through the link that will be flashed on your screen or type at the chat box. So see you all on our next webinar session that will be scheduled on September 8th, 2020. Webinar 2 is entitled Contextual Factors in the Design and Implementation of Impactful Education Policies Under the New Normal. This will be delivered by Dr. Tai Hee Choi of the Education University of Hong Kong. Also next week is webinar session 3 on modeling online conversations by Professor Ming Chiu, also from the Education University of Hong Kong. This will be on September 10, 2020. We will be sending you the links to these webinar sessions to your respective email addresses at least a day before the event. May we remind you again to please accomplish the feedback form after you leave the platform. Your feedback will be valuable in improving the delivery of this webinar series. We will also use this to validate your attendance apart from the names and agencies that you had typed in at the chat box. The link will only be available for 30 minutes after the session ends. It was a pleasure hosting you this afternoon. We look forward to meeting you all next week of our webinar series. God bless us all.